reference model, SCORE. With industries, he has a bachelor degree in industrial engineering in the University of Missouri, and he's also an SCORE P endorsed instructor. So, Jason, thank you very much for your participation. I think this presentation will be very useful for the participants, because they'll be able to see all the new tools that ASCM has to support companies to improve their supply chain. So those assessments will be very interesting for them.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you, Gustavo. So, I just pulled this up. Gustavo did a better job than I would have done introducing myself. But as he mentioned, I am responsible for the partner network in North America. That's inclusive of training partners, consulting partners, as well as some of our industry and technology partners. So, one other thing that I will mention as well is I once was a client of ASCM, so I've been on, the participants here on the call, I've been on your side of the table, so to speak. So I just mentioned that, as we go through this, if you have questions about what any of this looks like from the corporate client side, I'm happy to answer those questions as well. So just wanted to add that before we get into the presentation itself. So as Gustavo mentioned, one of the big questions we get asked as an association is, how do we as companies understand where our biggest vulnerabilities are from a supply chain perspective? How do we assess our supply chain capability? And to Gustavo's earlier point, that's what led to the release of two different assessments that we'll be going through in a little bit more detail today. So those two assessments as listed here, the maturity assessment. So this is really much more focused around, I'll say, the process capability from an end-to-end supply chain perspective. And then the second assessment is our talent assessment. And this is more focused on the human capital piece. Think, how well are our people trained to execute on our end-to-end supply chain processes? So, again, the idea with this as we go through is it allows a company to understand where they're most vulnerable, where they're weakest from both a process perspective and then as well from a talent perspective. And then the output of that is being able to make a much more informed decision when you're starting to think about things like, budget, where should we allocate our training dollars for our people, or where should we allocate our capital in terms of new systems or consulting or enhancing your processes, et cetera. So again, just setting that baseline and giving a much more informed perspective when making the investment. So we'll be going through both of these assessments today, and then we'll also talk a little bit about next steps in terms of if you're interested in pursuing this further, how you can get in touch with ASCM and Advanced Value Chain through Gustavo and Osvaldo. Last thing I'll mention is as you have questions, feel free to either raise your hand, put them in the chat. I'll try to monitor the chat as best I can, but if not, when we get to ends of sections, I'll go through and answer any questions that are asked throughout the presentation. So before we get into the assessments themselves, what I want to do is give a little bit of an overview of the supply chain operations reference or SCORE model for those of you who maybe aren't as familiar with the model. The SCORE model is the underlying model behind both the maturity assessment and the talent assessment. So it's really important to have a good understanding of it as we get into the content. So as I mentioned, SCORE is the supply chain operations reference model. It combines what I like to call the 4 Ps into one single framework. So those 4 Ps you can see here, that's performance, process, practices, and people. Just to quickly go through each one in a little bit more detail. So performance is around all things metrics. So really that's two key areas. So number one is what is the definition and calculation of the metric? So as you're starting to look at or examine, what dashboards, what scorecards do we have, understanding what is the industry standard definition and calculation of those metrics to make sure that you're aligned to that industry standard. And then the second is, once you understand how is the metric calculated and then you're actually calculating it, then being able to do benchmarking for those metrics to understand your performance in a particular area, whether that be, perfect order fulfillment or order fulfillment cycle time, or some of your cost of supply chain metrics, really then being able to compare, let's say, apples to apples when going through your metric performance. So first P, performance, all around that metric piece. Second P, process. This is really all around understanding both your as is and designing your to be state from a end-to-end supply chain process perspective. So the advantage here is, when you're doing value stream mapping, having that framework to better understand, instead of just starting from a blank slate, understanding, when we say plan, that's made up of these level two processes, which each level two process is made up of some, typical, I'll say, level three process steps, and understanding, okay, here's how we, as a company or organization, do this specific score process. So gives a little bit of a reference framework to go through as you're doing that process modeling, and really understanding where your gaps are from a process perspective. So second P, process in that. The next two Ps, practices and people. This is then really around, for those areas that you may have identified gaps either through your metric benchmarking or your process modeling. This is really then understanding what are some of the best practices and people skills that are out there that have been shown to improve performance. So, are there types of technologies that can be implemented to improve your forecasting accuracy, or skills you need to recruit or retain to improve that capability? So again, aligning practices and people skills to your overall improvement initiatives. So again, four Ps: performance, process, practice, and people. And the beauty of the score model is no matter where you enter the model, you can make your way to any of the other Ps. So as an example, you might say, hey, we're seeing issues with our forecast accuracy metric. You can come into the model through P, that's a metric, P performance. See, okay, forecast accuracy, see the definition and the calculation of that metric, but then also in the same model, see here are the processes that are associated with this forecast accuracy metric. Here are some of the best practices that have been shown to improve performance in forecast accuracy. And then here are some of the people skills that have been shown to improve performance as well. So no matter where you enter the model, you're able to navigate then to all other areas of the model. Last thing I'll mention is SCORE is a completely free open standard. So even if you're not interested in maybe one of the assessments itself, I would definitely recommend navigating to the model itself. There's a link here in the presentation that we'll distribute out, but really just navigating the model, see what all is contained in it. There's also a free 3-hour self-paced score course as well that gives further detail into the model itself that I would recommend as well. So all those resources can be accessed via the link in the presentation here. And as I mentioned, we'll make sure to get this distributed out to everybody post the webinar. All right, so now that we understand a little bit better about the background or the underlying model for both of the assessments, let's get into the assessments in a little bit more detail, and we'll start with the supply chain maturity assessment. So, as I mentioned, so both the maturity assessment and the talent assessment are free assessments that are offered to companies. And the idea is to give that top level view of the maturity level to guide your improvement and transformation efforts. So for the maturity assessment itself, that assessment scope is end to end. So looking at across plan, source, transform, deliver, return, or fulfill, return, as well as order processes as well. So looking across the end-to-end supply chain, and it's also industry agnostic. So it's coming at it from the capability perspective, not necessarily for a specific industry. Um, One thing I will mention as well is when you're doing the assessment, there is the ability for you as the client to select NA if there are certain areas where that are either not in scope or you don't handle as a part of your business operations. So it can be customized a little bit to certain industries, but again, it's industry agnostic as at a holistic level. Um, and then the end, once the assessment is taken by your organization, there's a formal output briefing that is put together, and then that is provided back to you through partners like Advanced Value Chain that summarizes not only the findings, but then also starts to link potential next steps that you can take. Think of this as, for these levels or for these areas where you may be less mature, here are some different options, different trainings, different things to consider to start to close those gaps that have been identified. So in terms of how the assessment itself works, so the maturity assessment is focused across the seven score level one process areas. There's 27 individual focus areas across those seven score level one processes. But how the process works is um, a unique survey link gets created for you as the client company that then gets distributed to the individuals that you select that you want to take this assessment. Those individuals then go through and take the survey. It takes about 90 minutes to 2 hours to complete. Go through, take the survey, and then once that survey is complete, then ASCM and Advanced Value Chain as the partner develop the output briefing that summarizes the results of that survey. Those results are then brought back to you and presented to you, and you receive that output briefing. And again, it really then dives down into for each of those focus areas, what are your scores for each area, and then understanding your aggregate score for each of the seven level one processes. Um, from a maturity levels perspective, it's going to be very similar to like a Gartner type scale, where the maturity levels range from, level one being very reactive, very much, I like to say it's kind of the supply chain is it's Christmas every day. You see what shows up and you deal with it, all the way to level five, which is very much orchestrated, connected, integrated end-to-end supply chain that's not only responsive but also proactive to customer needs, and is constantly able to change and adapt to changing market conditions. So again, each of the seven level one areas, you'll get a score from 1 to 5, as well as those 27 focus areas as well. So as I mentioned, there's the seven level one process areas. There's also the 27 focus areas. So what we see here is the 27 focus areas across the seven level one. So Just wanted to show this to give you an idea of, again, the breadth and depth of the different capabilities that you are going to see your relative maturity of by taking this assessment. So you see everything from in plan your S&OP forecasting methodologies, within sourcing, looking at strategic sourcing as well as your return performance. And then you also see on the far right, we also start to get an idea from an orchestration perspective or strategic um, perspective, how well are things like your supply chain strategy defined? How well is your network designed? How well is your supply chain segmented? As well as looking at things like circular supply chain as well. So again, this is the summary of those focus areas. The key thing here is to show the breadth and depth of the results that you'll get back from the assessment itself. Um, so this just gives a little bit more detail in terms of, as I mentioned, the levels being similar to like a Gartner where it's from level 1 to level 5. This really just outlines what constitutes a level 1 versus a level 2 versus a level 3, etc. So, you see things from in level 1, it's things like, minimal use of best practices, activities are ad hoc versus you see up in level 5, it's, your metrics are aligned to industry standards. Your technology is designed to enable your underlying processes. Your organization is designed to, fit what you want your process capabilities to be and all things in between. So this is just to highlight that, each of the levels has definitions. There's rigor around what constitutes a level 1, level 2, level 3, and just to show the difference between level 1 to level 5. So that then gets down one level further, and we actually, as part of the output, actually come back with here is what the maturity level description is for each of those 27 focus areas. So this one is just an example for S&OP. The way to read this is to say, okay, for maturity level 1, what does that mean if you are a maturity level 1? Well, it means, your demand planning and operations planning is siloed and may, lack defined or documented processes. Versus level 2, here's what that maturity level is, and so on and so forth. So again, this is all around defining, when we come back with the output results, it's saying you are a level 1 or a level 2, and then defining what does that mean so you understand exactly why you rank where you rank. And then when we look at, okay, here's how we start to think about improving, then you can start to understand, here's where we're starting from, here's our baseline from a capability perspective. So in terms of some of the outputs, then what does this look like? So I know this is a bit of an eye chart as it summarizes all the different outputs, but just to walk through what each of those looks like. So as a client company, you're going to get first and foremost in the upper left-hand corner, you're going to get a high-level view of what is your maturity level across the 7 level 1 processes. So summary view for each of those level 1 processes. On the right-hand side, then you'll get a breakdown of for each of the 27 focus areas that make up the level 1 score. What was your score in each of those 27 focus areas? So, for example, within planning, we see S&OP forecasting and collaborative forecasting, and then there's scores ranging from 1 to 3. So the detailed level breakdown scores for the level 2 process capabilities as well. Bottom left-hand corner, we then present the findings or those results in a summary view for the 27 focus areas. So think of this as kind of your process maturity scale on a page. So what this allows you to do from a client company perspective is see on a page, where are we the weakest in those areas versus where are we the strongest. So, in this example, we see the two process areas that are level one are collaborative forecasting and supply chain strategy versus level four and level five being our HR, our human resources, and our regulatory and compliance capabilities. So, this gives you a quick way to look and, as you start to again have those discussions of, hey, what processes do we want to focus our investment into improving? You can say, hey, this we think it makes sense to maybe start with collaborative forecasting or strategy, and maybe not making as many investments or any investment into the HR and regulatory and compliance capability, again, in this example. So you get your high level one rankings. You get your scores for each of the 27 focus areas. That then gets summarized kind of results on a page to give you a one-page look at where you rank across those areas. And then bottom right-hand corner, this is for each of those areas, for each of those focus areas, a breakdown of what is the focus area, what's the current state maturity level from 1 to 5 for that area. For that, what does that mean? So, as I mentioned before, for sales and operations planning, maturity level 3, this is the what that means from a capability perspective. And then the last thing is the next level considerations. Basically, what that outlines is here are things that you need to consider from a capability perspective to move from the level you're at now to the next level. So, to move from, in this example, a level 3 maturity to a level 4, here are the capabilities that you should consider implementing to make that jump. So again, this is just a sample of the output results that you'll get once you take that assessment, and really it gives you the ability to see not only at a high level, but also at that next level down, level 2, the breakdown of where your company sits from a capability perspective, and then also what are some of the things to consider from a capabilities perspective to increase your maturity in those areas. So as I mentioned, this is that in the bottom left-hand corner in the previous slide, this is that, I'll say, output on a page. Really gives you that one stop or one place to look and see your various capability rankings. And as mentioned here, this is really this becomes that starting point for more detailed analysis. So, you could take this and say, hey, we want to do, some additional process mapping. We want to do additional benchmarking. We want to, use this to inform our, IT strategy in terms of what tools do we need to go out and consider implementing, et cetera. So this becomes your baseline. This becomes your starting point. This becomes the way you inform your investment strategy from a supply chain transformation perspective. This also can be an input into your talent development discussions as well. So, considering again, where we less mature process-wise, that maturity may improve with additional either upskilling, reskilling, or hiring on other resources for that as well. So, and it guides not only your process improvement, but also your talent development discussions. And then as well as I mentioned, your technology, product implementations and investments as well. Again, you might say we want to prioritize making investments systems perspective in the areas where we are less mature versus more mature. So some of the things to consider, as I mentioned, the once you decide to take the assessment, it's, survey link gets created, it goes out to the individual or individuals from your organization that you want to go through the assessment. And then, once the survey is closed, it's another, week or two for us to create that output briefing, and then we come back to you with that. But before you go through the assessment process itself, it's really important to understand some of the, the upfront scoping questions that need to be considered before going through this. So, um, it's really important from a organization perspective that you don't try to do this assessment for, all products and in all divisions. So, because there's going to be differences in how you approach your supply chain from, I'll say let's call it a transactional environment where it is very much I'll use an example from when I was at Boeing. The supply chain for a transactional MRO, maintenance, repair, and overhaul contract versus a large scale production defense production aircraft supply chain. Those are going to be two totally different things. So it doesn't make sense to do one maturity assessment that covers both of those. You really want to make sure that you focus on looking at a particular supply chain, particular division, particular market from a supply chain perspective when you do this. So understanding what do you want to look at, and then understanding, who needs to go through this process, who are the people that need to take this assessment, and then understanding, how are you going to use the results of the assessment? Again, this is only setting a baseline. How do you want to use these to inform a talent development plan, a technology investment plan, a process modeling, a benchmarking, further analysis, et cetera. So again, just really understanding what do you want to look at, getting really crystal clear on what that scope is, understanding who is going to go through the process of doing this, and then understanding how do you want to use the results of this once the individuals go through that. So in terms of next steps, so if you are interested in either learning more or pursuing going through this assessment, you can reach out to either myself or Gustavo and Osvaldo to set up a more detailed session for your organization specifically. In addition, we also have an overview video that we've put together to outline in more detail the assessment, the process, give a little bit more detail on that. That can be accessed via this link. So again, just feel free to review that and then reach out to myself or Osvaldo. Our contact information will be in this deck. They can set up a scoping session for your organization. So. Again, just to summarize, completely free assessment, no charge. It's, from a time commitment perspective, it's, to take the survey, it's 90 minutes or 90 minutes to 2 hours. What you're going to get back is you're going to get that baseline across the end-to-end supply chain baseline maturity level for each of those level ones, as well as the specific level two focus areas. And that will allow you to better inform your investment strategy for a particular area, whether that be talent, process, technology, et cetera. So, but again, free of charge. This is not something that you are charged for as you do this. So I'll pause there. That is the overview of the maturity assessment. Before we get into the talent assessment, are there any questions on the maturity assessment, either on the process, the output, the results, how this gets used, et cetera?
You can open up the microphone and do the questions, or you can type it in the chat, whichever is better for you. Jason, some questions that we have had during assessments with different customers in the region, because this has been a very good tool for many customers that want to know which are the weakest areas of their supply chain and how to improve them. And I think this is a great tool to do that, to find out which areas are have the biggest gap to improve in depending where you want to go. some of the questions says, okay, what happens because you sent some questionnaires for different people, and the question sometimes is, what happens if maybe we have 3 or 4 persons in the same area and they give different answers or different scores about the maturity? What would you recommend in that part?
Yeah, so if we have multiple people that take the assessment and they have different answers, what's going to ultimately come out is it's going to be an average of those answers. So you'll either get kind of an average and hopefully kind of tamp down that noise a little bit. But the other thing that can be done, and this is where our partners come in, like Advanced Value Chain, is the other thing that can be done is it can be a facilitated assessment as well. So they can help with some of those conversations and kind of, I'll say, challenge some of the assumptions when actually going through and taking the assessment to help, say, are you really at this level of capability? Do you really do some of these things, or is it maybe a little bit level down? Um,
Yeah.
the other thing I'll mention that we've done that's been interesting with some customers in the past is we've had two groups take it. So we've had I'll say kind of the senior manager, director level take it, and then we've had the working level take it, and then we've done two separate sets of output where we say, here's how the people that are doing these processes on a day-to-day view it, and here's how the leadership views it. And it's kind of interesting to see the difference in views between those two groups. So there's a couple different ways we can look at it. Either, if it's just a straight average, if it's two separate demographics and then compare, or do a facilitated assessment through a partner like Advanced Value Chain, where they're helping to kind of challenge and drive to a consensus view of it.
Yeah, I think for that part, Osvaldo has had a lot of sessions with different customers, and I think face-to-face sessions to debate what's the real level for the company and question if you are in a certain level. I think that helps a lot. Yes. One question that usually they ask also is, maybe you already talked about it, is that sometimes companies have several supply chains within the company.
Mhm.
Because, for example, for an automotive company, it's not the same the supply chain that is directed to the OEM, to original equipment manufacturer, and it's maybe totally different than the spare part supply chain. So I think the recommendation is do different assessments for each of the supply chains, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's why we want to have that scoping session up front and really have a strong understanding of, what supply chain do we want to look at. So exactly to your point, Gustavo, you want to compare, you want to have it be a valid score where it's not, comparing a OEM production line to an aftermarket spares. So yeah, that's why it's important to have those upfront scoping sessions before going through the assessment.
Yeah. And the other question that they ask a lot is, okay, once we have the scores, uh, can we do some benchmark within with other companies maybe in the same industry?
I'd say not yet, but it's coming. So one of the things that we're doing this with many more, or we've been doing this with many companies. The idea is once we get to a critical mass from a statistical perspective, the idea is we'll want to, or we'll be able to actually offer, Gustavo, exactly to your point, benchmarking of this to answer exactly that question. So a company can not only say, what are our scores? They can say, how do our scores compare against an industry population as well? So we're not there yet. My suspicion is we'll probably have enough data where we'll be able to do that in probably later this year or early next year. So it is something that we have coming soon.
Okay. Uh, to the participants, some questions that you would like to ask Jason regarding the supply chain maturity assessment? You can put in the chat too. No questions?
All right.
All right.
All good. If you think of anything as you go through, obviously, just put them in the chat. We'll come back to them. No problem. So. Um, okay, so next is I want to take this, we talked about a little bit about, okay, the maturity assessment that's focused much more from a process capability. Now the idea is, okay, let's look at how we can assess our talent and the human capital piece of this. So up front, I'll say, it's going to be very similar from a process perspective, from a structure perspective, from a output perspective to the maturity assessment. But again, it's going to be focused solely on the talent piece of the supply chain. As I mentioned, very, very similar. Its end scope is end to end. You're going to get a formal output briefing, which in the form of access to a dashboard that shows your talent scores in your 7 level 1 process areas as well as your focus areas as well. And that gives you similar there. It gives you a baseline to understand where are you at from a people perspective. In your supply chain organization. Um, the other thing I'll mention too is there's also, and we'll see this in a second, is we very deliberately aligned the focus areas for the maturity assessment and the talent assessment to be exactly the same. So the advantage of that is if you as an organization go through and do both, what you'll be able to see is you can put those capability scores for each one in a 4x4 grid and show, okay, on your left hand on your x-axis, this is your scores from a talent assessment from 1 to 5. On the y-axis, this is your scores from a maturity assessment from 1 to 5, and you can start to see, where are you, high and high, low and low. You might see areas where you're low from a talent perspective, but high from a process perspective. So again, it gives even further information on where you see your biggest vulnerabilities, and you can overlay those to get results as well. So I did just want to mention that you do have the ability to do one and or both of them. And if you do both of them, there's the ability to kind of see that integrated view of the results and see where you're weak in, both talent and process piece. So again, as I mentioned, how the assessment itself works is going to be very similar to the maturity assessment. But this is really, again, around understanding your competency gaps from a people perspective. Um, the big difference here is going to be, there's 2 ways to take this survey. So there's, have the individuals who are doing this on a day-to-day activity do it for their particular process area. That's going to take them about 15 to 30 minutes for a process area. Or it can be taken at an aggregate level or at a manager or strategic level. And that's going to take about 2 to 4 hours to take the assessment across all level 1 process areas. So very similar in that unique survey link gets created, gets distributed out to individuals that you identify in your organization. They go through and take that survey, and then an output briefing in the form of a dashboard gets generated that is specific for your organization and gives you the breakdown for level 1, level 2, and then the focus areas below that as well. Um, Very similar in terms of the scoring methodology. It's a level 1 to level 5, level 1 being, little to no skill in that area, or little to no knowledge in that skill area, all the way up to level 5, which is kind of that expert level, and everything in between. But again, I just want to highlight it is a very, very similar process to the maturity assessment, and the focus areas are aligned to the maturity assessment as well. As I mentioned, you'll look at this and say, hey, this looks like the exact same slide you presented just before. It is. Again, the focus areas are exactly the same. You'll be able to see, again, both your talent, score, as well as your process maturity score. And it'll be an apples to apples comparison. One thing that's a little bit different is, rather than from a capabilities perspective, it being just at the capability level, for each of the level 2 capabilities, there are sets of skills that are applicable to that capability. So, again, a bit of an eye chart, but for what we see here is just to give you an example to say, for the level 1 plan, for the level 2 capability S&OP, here are the 12 skills that make up the overall score for S&OP, and then you have definitions for each of those skills as well. So as part of the output, you're going to get a breakdown not only of your scores in each of those areas. You're going to get to see here are the skills that make up those scores as well, and the definitions of them. So as I mentioned, there's kind of 2 different ways that this assessment can be taken. So the key question really comes down to
luego no jaló el link y les tuve que preguntar,
how
pero
do
pues ya
you
tenía media hora de retraso.
what this comes down to is really how do you want to, or who do you want to take the assessment? So do you want to have first line, your individual contributors that are actually doing the process day in, day out, take the assessment, and they're really going to be asking or coming at this from the perspective of, assessing your ability to do that skill in your work environment. The second option is to do it more at I'll say a manager or a strategy level, or at a consensus group level. And this is really looking at it from the perspective of assessing your organization's capability as opposed to your own personal ability to utilize the identified skill in their work environment. One thing I will mention here as well, as we get this question quite a bit, is the output results are always presented at an aggregate level. So you as an organization are not going to be able to see individual responses to a question. So you won't be able to see employee John Smith answered these levels for these questions. The idea with that is we want to make sure people are comfortable with giving their true feedback on their level of knowledge in these various areas. And the idea is that this shouldn't be used to make, I'll say, hire and fire decisions from an individual employee perspective. It's about giving you an idea of what's your capability at an aggregate level for each of these areas. So again, it's from your perspective as a client organization, it's up to you who and how you want to do this. But really it comes down to, are you looking at the individual contributors who are saying, how well do we know how to do this in our particular area as an individual? Or is it more at the manager, orchestrator, strategy level, where it's assessing how well does the organization know how to do this particular skill for our organization? So again, some sample outputs that you'll get back. So first and foremost, similar to the maturity assessment, where you kind of want to see that, view on a page. The first thing we start with is an output that looks at, what are your lowest scoring 20 skill areas across the end-to-end supply chain. So what we see on the top here is that that summary view of that. Then it gives you the ability, color coded by what score level one process area those skills reside in. So, you can see that for this example, service delivery quality analysis, which is in transform, is your lowest skill level area, followed by responsible sourcing practices in source, and so on and so forth. What we see then on the bottom of the slide is then, okay, starting to say, okay, linking this back to what trainings are out there to improve your performance improve your rating in a particular area. So, again, bit of an eye chart, but as an example, let's say, for customer relationship management or CRM for that skill, current state rating is a 2.47. From an ASCM perspective, here are the certifications, the certificates, and foundations courses, as well as other that would help to upskill employees in that particular area. So again, it's really about closing the gap of where are you the lowest from a maturity level perspective? What is that current state capability? And then what are some of the trainings and tools that are out there to consider making an investment in to upskill and improve your maturity level in each of these particular areas? One of the things that can be interesting with this is you can use this as a kind of a before and after. So to the question Gustavo asked around is there a way to use this as an internal benchmark? We have had companies that are looking at utilizing this and saying we want to do this, we want to do this before, then do some training, and then come back and have the same population that went through the training take the assessment again and see if their performance and maturity levels improved in those areas to see if they're getting a return on their training investment. So there's a way to use this to not only identify where you should be making the investments, but also start to see some of the benefits that you're getting from making those training investments as well. In addition to that summary view, there's also, like with the maturity assessment, you're also going to get a breakdown of each of those areas from the standpoint of what was your score at an aggregate level for plan, how many responses did you get for that area, and then what are your scores for each of those areas, those sub areas as well. So again, it gives you both the high level view of your maturity levels, but then gives further detailed breakdowns as well that you're able to see and go through. Like the supply chain maturity assessment, it's really important to have a good idea of what scope you want to look at before you go through this. So really looking at it, is there a particular division or function that you want to take this? Who do you want to take it? So back to the point I made of, is it, individual contributors or more at the manager level? Who needs to be informed of this? Are you bringing HR into this conversation, leadership, et cetera? And then as well, making sure to give ample time for the participants to actually go through and take the assessment, so you get the results, the output that you're looking for. So again, in summary, so talent assessment, very similar to the maturity assessment from a process perspective. Survey link gets created, individuals take that. Output gets created around your scores, both at a aggregate level as well as more detailed for each particular focus or skill area. Really important to understand what scope you want to have for the assessment before you have individuals go through and take it. And like the maturity assessment, feel free to reach out to either myself or Gustavo and Osvaldo to set up a more detailed conversation around the assessment itself and/or scoping if you are interested in pursuing it further. Last thing I'll mention, so as I mentioned before, but just to highlight, so Advanced Value Chain Institute is an ASCM Premier Elite partner. So they are our highest tier of partner. They are able to assist not only in the facilitation of the assessment itself, they are also qualified to deliver trainings, consulting, as well, based on the output of that. So, from a local presence perspective, if you're interested, reach out to Gustavo or Osvaldo. We have their QR code contact information. But I just want to make it clear that, if you're working with them, it is the equivalent of working directly with ASCM. They are our local Premier League partner in the Monterey area. They have experience with these assessments, and you are in good hands. So with that, just to close, again, maturity assessment focused on your process capability, the talent assessment focused on your people skills, so much more the human capital piece. Both assessments are free of charge and are available to you, and can be used to set that baseline and help you understand what areas you need to make investments in, across the, either process, tools, technology, skills, upskilling, etc. So free of charge. And again, if interested in learning more, there's some resources in the deck that will get distributed out to everyone following the call. Or if not, feel free to reach out either to myself or Gustavo and Osvaldo, or Osvaldo, to learn more, and hopefully go through and take the assessment itself.